Hello everyone. I'll revise a bit on what we have done till now and then we will start our next session. So till now we have seen that HTML is the structure of the web page, CSS is the styling of the HTML elements or tags, JavaScript it makes the web pages interactive. We are going to have a look in depth about JS. The Bootstrap is a library which has inbuilt CSS and JavaScript codes. We also had a look at Bootstrap grids and we made our own homepage. We'll be learning next about JavaScript. So let's start the second session. Yeah, so welcome to the JavaScript session. The web page we made looks good, but it is still static, which means that the user cannot interact with the website to change the way it looks. What if we want to display something when the button is clicked, or we want to change the background in dark mode on a click? All these functionalities or the logic part of the website can be added using JavaScript. We will be writing the logic of our website using JavaScript, and like a wizard, it will make everything work. Let's have a look at the contents before we begin. So first, we'll cover an introduction to JavaScript. Next, we'll have a look at what are functions in JavaScript. Then we'll move on to DOM manipulation, event handling, and finally, we'll create a calculator to understand the basics of JavaScript. Yeah, so let's start with the introduction to JavaScript. As I said earlier, JavaScript makes the website interactive. Here in the slide, you can see the button, which looks good as we have added CSS to change its color. But how can we tell the website to do something when the button is clicked? That interactivity in a web page is added using JavaScript. We can define a function that can be called when the button is clicked. Next, we will be discussing what a function is. JavaScript functions can be either written in a script tag or can be imported as a library in the header script tag. So let's have a look at what functions are. Functions are reusable blocks of code that you can write once and run again and again, saving us the need to rewrite the same code. This is really useful. There are a number of ways to define functions, but for now, we'll concentrate on one simple type. Here, we have defined a function using the keyword function followed by a name of the function with parentheses put after it. Inside the parentheses, we have the arguments which should be passed to the function. After that, there are curly braces. Inside the curly braces, we put all the code that we want there. When we want to run the code, we type the name of the function followed by the arguments. And that's how we can run this function. Let's see how to use this function with conjunction with a button. So first, let's create a new HTML page. So I create a new HTML page. Yep, we have the HTML page. I'll open this in Sublime Text, and I'll also open this with Chrome. So let's set it up. Yeah. Now we have the page open. Now first let's create the general basic template of HTML. We have the header tag. We have the body tag. Inside the head tag, we would import our libraries. So I'm going to import the BootStrap library that we already have seen. So that's it. I've also set the car set, which defines how the encoding of the HTML is to the browser. Next, we'll set the title. Let's say we set the title as button interaction. I'll refresh this and you can see the title has changed to button interaction. Next, let's create a button. So for creating a button, first I'll create a container from BootStrap. Next, inside the container, there must be a row. Inside a row, there must be a column. I want all the content to be center aligned, so I'll put text center class to the column. Inside that, I'll be creating a button. Now, I'll write some text inside the button. Let's say this is a button, and I'll save it. So this is how the button is looking. Let's add some margin to the top of the container. Cool. Now this button does not really look that nice. So I'll use BootStrap to style the button. So you can see now the button looks a bit light, but if you want, then you can even add this class. Yeah. So now the button is looking really nice, but let's say we click it, then nothing happens. That's because we haven't defined what should happen when this button is clicked. Let's see how to do that. So first of all, you don't need to now concern yourself with what exactly on click is. Think of it as you are telling the browser what to do when this button is clicked. So on click, we want to, let's say, call a function. I'll name the function print to console. So when the button is clicked, print to console function would be called with the value 10 as in the argument. What I'll do next is define this function. Inside the head, I will create a script tag. All your JavaScript code should be inside the script tag. Next, let's define a function. So you need to use the function keyword to define a function. Next, we have the name of the function. And then we have the argument. Let's say I name it value. So it's value. Those familiar with C++ would notice that I did not need to specify the type of the variable before defining the function. So that's a pretty handy function available in JavaScript. So next, what we want to do, let's say we just want to print to the console the value which was passed to this function. To do that, we'll be using console.log of value. Now, where do we see the value? So first come to this web page and press F12. You will be able to see that extra bottom nav bar is visible now, and inside the console is already open. This is the developer mode. You can type your JavaScript code here also, and it would run as if it's running on the page. Let's see what happens when we press this button. So first I'll refresh, and when I'm pressing this button, you can see a 10 was printed. If I keep on pressing this button, you can see the number of times 10 was printed has increased. So this is nice, right? Because now we know how to interact with the button. When we press this button, this function is called, and using that function, we are just printing it right now. What we can do is we can manipulate the entire document using this function. I'll give you a hint. Let's say we press this button and you want to fetch some data from the server or send some data to the server, and then you want to show the data you receive, let's say a text message or maybe a post, and you can show it here. We'll have a look at how to do this in the later section of the session. You can also define your JavaScript code in the console itself. So let's define a function here. So I'll write function uh, console. I'll name the function as console function. And let's say we pass a value to this function. And just a moment. And let's say I define a new variable. To define a variable in JavaScript, you have to use the var keyword. So I set var my variable is equal to 10 plus the value which was passed, and then I return my variable. So let's define the function like this. Whatever value we pass to the function will return 10 plus the value. Yeah, so now we have defined our function. We'll call this function now the console function, and let's say we pass 10. So you must be expecting 20, and as you can see, we get the output 20. So you can write your JavaScript code in the console window also. Now that we know how to interact with the button, let's see how to manipulate our web page using JavaScript. So DOM manipulation using JavaScript. What exactly is DOM, or Document Object Model? The DOM is just a programming interface which gives you the ability to access your web page and do operations over it. It basically connects your scripting language to the web page. In easy words, everything you can in a web page inside a browser is essentially an object. Now that we can interact with a button, let's see how to manipulate the web page using JavaScript. So let's get started with DOM manipulation using JavaScript. So what exactly is DOM? Its full form is Document Object Model. The Document Object Model is just a programming interface which gives you the ability to access the web page and do operations over it. It basically connects your scripting language to the web page. In easy words, everything you can see in a web page inside the browser is essentially an object. Each image, each paragraph, etc. When a web page is loaded, the browser creates a document object model of the page. You can have a look at the document object model tree of the web page. There is the root element, HTML. Inside it, there is the head element and the body element. All the elements inside a parent element come below the parent element in the DOM tree. This tree can be traversed using JavaScript and can be manipulated, hence giving us the flexibility to change the HTML as well as the CSS of the website. Furthermore, the elements can also be given specific attributes like ID or class, which can be used to directly access them from JavaScript. So for example, each paragraph is defined in the DOM using the class para. The header paragraph or the first paragraph on the page may be unique and be defined by a unique identifier id is equal to start paragraph. DOM defines the logical structure of a web page. Let's get started with an example which I believe would help you to understand how to access DOM elements using JavaScript. So first of all, we have this button which we had defined earlier. What I'll do is I'll use the debugger to access this button. So now let's try to first see the HTML code. So here we had defined the button. Now I want to access this button in JavaScript. For that, we need to uniquely define this button. There can be many buttons in the HTML page. To uniquely identify this button, let's add an IT attribute to it. Let's say this is button 1. So now I have given a unique attribute to the button, that is the ID button 1. Let's see how we can access this button using the console. First, I'll refresh the console. Next, we'll use document dot get element by ID. So we'll use this method to access any element with a specific ID. So the ID we need to find is button 1. Once I press enter, you can see that this button was accessed. When I'm hovering over this button, you can see the button gets highlighted here also. So now we can access the element using JavaScript. But what can we do using this DOM object? Let's see. We'll have a in-depth look on what we can do. But for now, I'll give you a basic idea. Let's first define a variable x and save this button element inside it. Next, what I'll do is I'll set the style of the button. So I'll do x dot style dot width is equal to, let's say I want to change the width of this button to 300 px. I can use this code to change the width of the button. As you can see, the width of the button has changed. This is a very simple example of how we can change or manipulate the HTML using JavaScript. You can press this button, which will call this function, inside which you can write and manipulate HTML documents like this. Next, we'll see another way of accessing this button. So let's add a unique class to this button. Let's say I write first button. Even though first button is not defined in BootStrap, neither have we custom defined this class. It's fine to use it. Let's refresh it. So as you can see, after refreshing, all the history which we did using the console is lost and the button is again back to its normal width. Let's access all the buttons which have the first button class. So for this, I will use document dot get element by class name. And which class name do we want? We want the first button. Now there can be many buttons or many elements which have the class first button. We want to access the first element of the array. So we'll do this. And as you can see, by hovering over it, we are able to access the first button. If there were two buttons, I'll give the ID as button 2, as the ID should always be unique. Let's reload it. You can see there are now two buttons. So when I do document.getElement by class name, I use the class first button and I do of 0, which means I'm accessing the first element. Then you can see I have accessed the first element, the first button having the class first button. When I do of 1, you can see the second button is now highlighted. That is how you can access elements which have the same class. Another way of trying to access these buttons are by traversing the tree DOM. As you saw, there is a tree of DOM objects. So we can start from document and navigate step by step to each element. Let's see how to do that. So first, we go to the document. Inside that, we go to the body. Inside the body, you can see its first child node is the container. So body.child nodes. So this will give all the child nodes. We want the first one, so we'll do child nodes of 0. Next, we'll again want to have the child node of the container. So I'll go and have a look at the child nodes. Just a moment, I'll have a look. This seems to be something wrong. Give me just a moment. Okay, so instead of traversing the entire document, let's actually just set the ID of this column as call 1. What we'll do is we'll first access the column by get element by ID. I'll have to refresh this page. So now I do document dot get element by ID of call 1. After that, what I want to do is get the first element inside the column, which is button 1. So I do dot child nodes, and you can see I get a node list. Let's see what the node list contains. It first contains some text, which we have kept empty. So this text actually does not have anything. Next, we have our button 1. So to access button 1, we need to do dot child nodes of 1. This gives us the access to the button. So you can traverse the entire DOM structure using child nodes. So that's all on how to access the DOM elements. We saw a bit on how to even manipulate the DOM elements. Next, we're looking in depth on how to manipulate, and I'll also show you an example where we can add new buttons or delete some buttons using JavaScript by interacting with the buttons available on the HTML page. One way of updating the web page is to keep refreshing your web page after, let us say, every few milliseconds. This is a very bad practice as there are a lot of overheads while asking the page to be refreshed and would unnecessarily hog the CPU. You can use JavaScript to make changes to the website without much overhead. For example, in Facebook, whenever a new message came, you can use JavaScript to show that in your chat box. Otherwise, you can also, the page, let's say, keeps on refreshing after every few milliseconds. Then also, you will be able to view the messages in the message chat box, but that would be a very bad programming practice, as that would add a lot of CPU usage to your computer. Before we go and have a look at an example on how to manipulate and add and delete elements in an HTML page, let's have a look at event handling. So earlier you saw that we used the on-click attribute in a button. Let's have a look in depth of what that is. For each action that you perform in the browser, an event is triggered. A button being clicked, a page loading, a video playing, or your mouse moving, hovering, your mouse being released, etc. All are events. In response to these events, we can run our own custom code. The constructs that listen out for the event happening are called event listeners, and the custom blocks of code that run in response to the event firing are called event handlers. The code block we wrote before should be called when the event of clicking a button is performed, as you saw earlier. There are three ways in which we can bind to an event. Let's see how to do that. So I'll remove this button. Let's refresh this page. You can see we have the button. We have set the ID also to button 1. One way to access the on-click event listener was to have an on-click attribute and write and call your function here. This is the first way using HTML you can access the on-click event. We have written the function print to console in the script tag over here. Next, we can access this on-click event on the button in another way. Let's do that. I'll add the second button. Let's name it button 2. And I'll remove this on-click HTML attribute. Let's refresh this page. And when I'm clicking on this button, you can see nothing is happening. When I'm clicking on this button, you can see 10 is being printed. Let's change the name of this button to name the first button as button 1. Also, while printing to console, instead of value, let's print the button number. Button test. And here I'll write 1. So now that this is done, let's see how to access button 2 directly via JavaScript. So using document.getElement by ID, and then using button 2, I can access this button. To set what should happen on click, you can set dot on click is equal to print to console. So instead of that, let's define our own new function. So we'll set this as a function which takes the argument value, but we will not be passing it. So we'll just do console.log button rest 2. So what we are doing is we are accessing the button using its ID. Then we are setting on click as a function which prints to the console button press 2. Let's refresh this page. So it's saying cannot set property on click of null. So we are getting this as null. Let me have a look on why this is happening. Let's refresh this. Um, I'll have a look at why exactly is this. The problem is not inside the code, but in the structure of the code. We have used document.getElementById in the head when the body has not yet been initialized. So the buttons don't exist. That's why trying to access the button inside the head script tag gives a null. So we should shift our script tag to the body. I'll cut this code and I'll create another script tag inside the body. And I'll add this code here. So now the button has been already initialized. So this should not give any error. Let's refresh the page. You can see the error has disappeared. Also, pressing on button 2 prints the statement button pressed 2. So this code is working now. This was another way in which we can access the on-click event of the button. One more way of accessing the on-click event is by the add event listener. So first we'll access the button using its ID. Let's see, I'll create another button with an ID of button 3. We now have 3 buttons. I have accessed that button using get element by ID. Then I'll do dot add event listener. Which event do we want to listen? We want to listen to the event click, and we want to call the function print to console. Let's say we create our new function here, print button 3, and that's it. Define the function, use the function keyword, set the name, and do console.log button pressed 3. Let's refresh the page and see if this code works. So nice. This button is also interacting with our JS code because we have added an event listener of click on this button. You can see that the button was pressed multiple times. We got a 4 here. So that is how events work. Next, we'll have a look at an example on how to use these events to add or delete some elements in the HTML page. So let's start writing our code. First of all, I'll clear the code we have written till now. Title DOM manipulation and remove the scripts also. Refresh this so we have nothing. I'll copy paste some code and later on explain it to you what exactly is happening. Yeah. So as you can see, I have created a container and added a button inside it. So that is the here button. I set the color of the button as button primary. So primary in Bootstrap means blue. Similarly, I have created another row and I've added two buttons to the row. One of them has the color button primary and the other has the button danger color, which is red. You can see I'm using the on-click event listeners and I have to yet uh, write the function, but you can see I'm calling some functions when these buttons are pressed. Also, I have created another row, but I have not added any buttons or any content inside this row. What I have done is I have set the ID of this empty column. We'll be accessing this column and we'll be adding some child nodes to this column. Let's see how to do that. First, we will be creating the script tab inside which we'll be writing a JavaScript code. First, I want to show you how to manipulate the CSS and the text inside the here button. So first, let's write the toggle state function, which is called when the here button is pressed. So I'll define the toggle state function. It does not take any parameters. Next, I have set the ID of the toggle state function button as toggle button. So we'll access that button using document dot get element by ID and store this in a variable because we'll be using this many times. Next, what we want to do is if the toggle state is 0, then we want to change the color to red, and if the toggle state is 1, we again want to change it to blue. So we want to first create a variable toggle state and set it to 0 by default. Next, if the toggle state is 0, then we access the my button and set its inner HTML, which is the text inside the button, to there. So the text would change from here to there. Next, we'll remove the class button primary and add a button danger class to this button. So my button dot class list. So all the classes applied to the button are present inside this class list, in which I'll do remove button primary and add a new class to the class list, which is button danger. Next, we'll also change the state now to 1. Let's see what happens with this code. I've refreshed the page, and when I press here, you can see document.getElement by ID is not a function. So I have mistyped this, the element. Let's refresh this. So there's no error. Let's press here. And you can see the color changed from blue to red, and the text also changed from here to there. If I again want to click this and we want the color to change back to blue, we have to write here else if toggle state is 1, and I'll copy the other code. We want to set the inner HTML to here, remove the button danger class and add button primary class to this class list and also set the toggle state to 0. Let's refresh this page, and now when I click here, it becomes there and the class also changes. When I click it back, then again the red color is changed to blue color and the text also changes. So that is how you can manipulate the CSS and the HTML using JavaScript. Next, we'll see how we can create new elements using JavaScript. You can see I've created these two buttons, add and remove, which call the function add element and remove element on the onClick event. Let's define the add button function add element, and inside this we'll want to write the code of how to add an element to this column. So first we'll access this column here and name the column as parent element. Access the element, I'll use document.getElementById. The name of the ID is add here. That's it. Now we want to create a new element. To create a new element, we'll use document.createElement, which is predefined in JavaScript, and we'll set this as button. So now we'll be creating a new element of type button. You can create any element type you want, like a paragraph or an anchor or an image and so on. Next, we want to change some attributes of the new element. So I access new element dot class list dot add the button class, which is predefined in the BootStrap library. Next, I'll add the button primary class, which sets the button color background to blue. And I'll set the new element dot inner HTML, which will set the text inside the button to be new button. Now we have created this button, but we want to add it to the parent element. To do that, we can append child new element. This will append this new element to the parent element. Let's save this and refresh this page and see what happens when I click add. You can see a new button is added every time I'm pressing the add button. The remove button will not work right now because we have yet to add the remove element button. So it's not working and it's giving the error remove element is not defined. So let's first define the remove element button. I'll copy the add element code, change its name to remove element. There we will access the parent element. We don't need to create a new element here. So I'll remove this code. What we want to do this is that if the parent element contains a button, then we want to remove the button. So we'll have to first check if the parent element has any child nodes. So if the length of the child nodes list is not 0, then we want to remove the child which is at the node 0. So this will remove the child from the parent element, and we are giving the first child node to be removed. Let's see. So I'll add a new element And to remove it, if I press remove, the first element is being removed. So this is the way you can add and remove buttons using JavaScript. So you can manipulate now CSS, HTML, create new elements using JavaScript. Now I think all of you are equipped with all the basic knowledge required to create a dynamic web page. Let's get our hands dirty and write the code of our own personal calculator. This will help you further understand JavaScript, which you can use creatively to make your website dynamic. So first of all, I'll remove the code we have till now. Let's change the title to making a refresh the page. Now let's start first making the design of the calculator. First, I'll create a container with a margin of 5. Inside the container, we have the row. Inside the row, column. Instead of directly using a column, which would occupy the entire width of the web page, I'll first create a call md3 empty column tag, after which I'll create another column to call medium 6 tag. This will ensure that the first 3 columns are empty and our content is centered in the 6 columns. If you remember, you can visualize the website having 12 imaginary columns. What we want is the content inside this column to be centered. So we'll add text center to it. We'll add a margin of 5. So margin in the y direction should be, let's say, 3. Also, we'll add a shadow to our column. All of these classes are predefined in BootStrap. Next, I'll add a row inside which I must have a calculator call, in which I'll write calculator. Before, so this is how it looks right now. I'll give you an idea of what we are trying to make. So this is how our calculator should look at the end of the design. So this should be a blue color. Let's make this column blue in color. So I'll add the first button primary and by 3. So actually, instead of using margin, I'm using padding, which ensures that the background color is applied to the margin also. Next, we have the calculator. We want to add this area also. So we haven't yet touched on how to create a text area. I showed it to you while we were learning about HTML. We'll start using it now. So I'll create another row. Inside the row, I'll add a column. We'll add a margin to the top of unit 3. Next, we'll create a text area element. For the text area, if you remember, there were two attributes. One were the rows and another were the columns. We'll set rows to be equal to 4, and instead of setting the columns, we'll use CSS to set the style width to be 100%. Let's see how it looks. So you can see we have our text area here. Instead of we are going to use this text area to show the history, the past calculations we have done. So we want to show the history here. So we want our text to be right aligned, not left aligned. For this, we'll set text align to right. If I refresh it, you will be able to see the text here in the right alignment. Also, we want that this text area should not be editable by us. This history should not be edited if I want to edit it. So, to make the text area read only, you can just add a read only attribute to here. And that's it. Now I'm trying to type into this text area, but as you can see, nothing is happening. That's it. I'll add a padding to the sides because the text otherwise would be very close to the border. So I'll set the class as padding of 3, and that's it. Also, we'll want to access this text area later on. I'll set the ID as history. Next, let's start making our buttons for the calculator. I'll close the debugger mode for now. Next, I'll create another row in which I'll create first a column of size 10 and another column of size 2. The first column would contain this and the last columns would contain this. Let's do that. So the first column of size 10 and another column of size 2. Next, we'll create a row inside the column. Inside the row, there must be a column. And inside this, we want an input text bar to be present. So if I type 2 plus 2 here and press enter, then we want 4 to come here. So we want the field to be editable. So to enter an input, you need to create the input tag. The type is text because you want to enter text. We can ignore the name for now and set its width to be 100%. I'll set width as 100%. And I'll set its ID to be expression. Let's see how it looks. So you can see that we have a call MD10 inside the call MD6, and the input takes the entire width of the call MD10. Next, I would be copy pasting some code which will create the first column of our calculator numericals. So now using this, we have created the first column. I'd like to make some changes to the CSS so this looks nice. First of all, let's create a custom CSS class named full width. It will set the width to be 100% of the parent component. So instead of setting the style to be width 100%, I'll set the class full width. Same here. I'll remove this width 100% and in the class I'll add a full width. Now here this is the new code which was added. I created a row after the expression. Inside that I have call MD4. So we are using 1/3 of the row inside which we have an input which is of type button, has a value of 1, has the class full width. So I'll refresh this page and you can see that this button is taking full width of call MD4. So 1/3 of the 12 columns, imaginary columns. And I have said that on click, it should call this a function named dis with the value 1. We have to yet define this function. We'll do it later on. Similarly, we have another row in which we have the values 4, 7, and a dot. Let's complete this column first. So I'll add another column and another column. The code is very similar, so I won't be going over it again. So all of this content has been made. One thing which I would like to specify is that the value, the equal to button does not call this, it calls the function solve. So we have to yet define what this is and what solve is in the JavaScript code. Let's add this C slash minus plus and into buttons also. We'll do this in the call MD2 we had created over here. Inside it, we'll create a row for each button and then add all the contents of the row. So I've copy pasted the code. So for in each row, we first have an input of type button whose value is C and it calls the function clear. Next, we have a value of slash which calls this with slash. Let's have a look. Yeah. So this is how our calculator is looking. Let's add a bit of a margin to the bottom. So I'll find the container or this row which contains all of this and I'll add a margin bottom of let's say 3. And yes, now it's looking a bit nice. So the design of the calculator is done now, but the calculator is not working. So let's add the functionality to this calculator. For that, I'll create the script tag where we will be adding our JavaScript code. So we need to create 3 functions. The function this, which takes in some value. The function clear, which clears the text in the expression bar. and the function solve, which solves the text available in the expression bar. So let's see how to create this. In this, what we want is whenever this function is called, we want to first access the expression bar and append the value which was passed to this to the value present in this bar. So whenever I press 5, 5 is added to this input text. If I press 6, 6 is added to this input text. So I'll first access the expression bar by document.getElement by ID expression dot value. As it is an input with the type text, we can set its value to be plus equal to the value which was given in the function. To reduce ambiguity, I'll name it as val, and that's it. Let's refresh. So whenever I press 1, this function is called with string 1, which gets appended to the input expression element. So this is now working. Let's get on to clear. Whenever clear is called, we want the expression element bar's value to be empty. So we set the value as empty in the expression bar whenever clear is called. Let's see if this works. I have some text here right now. When I press C, the clear function is called, which clears the value in the text. Now let's create the solve button, which is the most important part of our calculator. So first of all, what I like to do is I like to get the expression value we have inside this input expression bar. And I like to assign it to a variable. Let's say expression. Next, we'll use a JavaScript inbuilt function named eval. So eval var output is equal to eval x expression. So eval, whenever a string is passed to eval, saying let's say 1 plus 1, eval gives the output as 2. So it converts string to a programming language. This is really helpful, and we'll be using this to finding the output of the expression. Next, now we have the output. The first thing we want to do, whenever equal is pressed, we want the input expression to be empty. For that, we'll call the clear function. So we are setting the expression value to be nothing. Next, what we want to do is that we want to add the expression we had along with the output to the history bar. To do that, first we need to access the text area history. So I'll create another variable history and access the element by document get element by ID history, which we had set earlier. Now we want to append the current expression to the history text. So history dot value is equal to or plus equal to, let's say, an enter, which is /n. /n stands for a new line, plus the expression along with an equal sign and the output. So we are updating the history value by appending a new line and the expression and the output. Let's see if our calculator is working. So I'm doing 1 plus 1. On pressing equal to, the solve function would be called. So some problem happened. Let's see what's the problem exactly. So expression and output have been shown as object HTML input element. Let me have a look why this is happening. So the problem is that I cannot set the expression as a variable name. If I have an ID with expression, then I should have the variable name something different from the ID. So to debug this, I set the variable name as x and I did a console.log of x. So when I do one, just a moment. So I was debugging this. I have to change the ID. I'll refresh this page. And now if I do 1 plus 1 equal to, you can see that we are getting here expression as 1 plus 1. Similarly, we can't set the variable output. We should use y. I'll make the changes. Instead of expression, we'll use x. For output, we'll use y. Let's refresh this page and see if it works. So great, it seems to be working. I'll remove this debugging console.log, refresh it, and yeah, our code is now ready. We can do 1 plus 1 plus 5 set equal to, and you will be able to see the history here as well as the result. Also, the text here is set to be clear. So I hope you have a basic idea of how to use JavaScript to add logic to your website. You can use CSS and HTML to make your website look good, and JavaScript to add logic to your website. So that's it for session 2. I hope you enjoyed this session and will be able to apply the knowledge you have learned to make creative websites. I'll wrap up this session now. So we have learned in this session that JavaScript is the logic of a website, how to make functions in JavaScript, manipulating tags or DOM elements using JavaScript, and we also created a calculator. Tomorrow, we will learn to use Angular, a powerful JavaScript framework, and also how to convert our web pages to web apps using Ionic. What I want you all is to first have your Node.js and Visual Studio Code already installed. So to set up the Node.js, you can go on this link and use this link for downloading Visual Studio Code. The links are present in the description as well as the chat box. So after you have set this up, this is how you should set up the Angular Hello World program. npm is the node package manager using which you can install the Angular. Then you can issue these commands to create a new app. If you have any doubts or face some errors while doing this Hello World, then you can contact us on the email ID shown in the description. So thank you and have a great day ahead. Now, there will be a doubt session before tomorrow's workshop. So guys, please join the meeting link sent to you.